Hello, my name is John Scott, and I am the pastor here at Parkwood Baptist Church. I was asked if I could take a moment and share a brief testimony of how God's worked in my life, and anytime I get the opportunity to do that, I am glad to do so. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were adamant about carrying me to church, so I had an advantage. Church was a part of our dated or our week to week existence. Uh, when I got older, as a teenager, not really older, but as a teenager, I remember being a church kid, but not really knowing much about Jesus other than what I heard and sung. And I was invited to go to a teen camp. And so I decided to go to a teen camp. I wish I could tell you it was because I really wanted to grow with the Lord, but I was actually liking a little girl at that time, and she was going, and I was afraid if I don't go, then she's going to find somebody who's a good church guy and just kind of drop me. So I went for selfish reasons. But as I went to that camp, I remember the Lord using so many things that week. I got into some trouble at the very beginning of the camp, and I remember one man who was very kind to me, showed me a lot of love instead of really beating up on me. And that was very instrumental because during that camp revival, his daughter sung a song that night, and the song was People Need the Lord. And I don't remember what was preached that night, but when she sung that song, I felt like she was talking to me. And when the invitation was given, when the speaker that night asked for those who wanted to know more about Christ to come to an altar, man, I was one of the first ones to that altar that night, and I gave my heart to the Lord. It wasn't long thereafter, that same camp, I felt the Lord calling me to preach or into the ministry, and I submitted to that call. And I wish I could tell you that was the end of the story and everything went well and I was just a servant of God all my life, but that's not the case. Uh, Got into my older teenage years and I started playing church rather than being the church. And I learned how to be one thing in front of people and be another thing behind the scenes. And I became very good at being hypocritical. And I don't say I got in with the wrong crowd because that was my crowd. I just did not focus on Christ during that time. Graduated from high school and actually went to Bible college because that was what everybody expected me to do. Not necessarily because I felt led to do it, but because that was what my expectation was. And I remember just kind of coasting through my first year of Bible college. Nothing major happened. Did good in my studies and just wanted to get through it. And it was after my freshman year in Bible college, I was cutting grass for someone. And I was in an open field, and God got a hold of my heart. He really did. It was crazy. I mean, there was no music, there was no church, but there was an altar, and that altar was that lawnmower. And I remember stopping the lawnmower and getting before God with tears in my eyes this time and saying, God, if you give me another chance, I do want to serve you. Man, He is the God of second and third and hundreds of chances, and I'm so thankful for that. One of the things I told the Lord, and it's been a long time ago, but I remember saying, if you forgive me and give me another chance, I want to make it right. And so I called some of my professors and shared with them my hypocrisy and shared with them how I just kind of played church and played Christian and not really committed myself to the Lord. And I got some encouraging words from some of those men. I also remember saying that I would, if given the opportunity, just address the entire student body. Well, my sophomore year going back to school, it was one of the chapel services, and the dean of students came up and said that the speaker, who was supposed to be there at that day, that particular day, did not show up. I don't know if he was sick or what happened, and he wanted to open the floor to any of the students if they had something they want to share. Man, I was like, God, not now, not today. But it was the time that the Lord had opened for me to do that, and I shared with the entire student body that I had gone to school because I was really coerced to do it and really had not followed Christ. But my heart and my desire was to do that from this point on. And I had many people encourage me, and I had some people kind of with doubt, shadows of doubt, and I can't blame them because, I mean, what's to say I wasn't just doing this for attention now? From that point on, though, God began to do some things in my life. I met my future wife. I was hired by the college to do public relations and speaking and traveling. And then not long after that, as a young man, I accepted the call to a church to become their pastor. And man, I didn't know anything about pastoring, but that's okay. That's where God wanted me. And God didn't want somebody who knew everything, at least who thought he knew everything. He wanted somebody who knew nothing so he can show how big he was, even though we're extremely small. God began to do a great work in my life, and I was very excited to be a part of that. Again, I wish I could say that was the end of my story, but it wasn't. It was through those times, I believe, I just took my eyes off the Lord. And I got away from God. Even as a pastor, I got away from God. It was one of those crises, one of those point of interaction where the Lord I remember I was just calloused in my heart. And I was outside in a little building behind my house. And man, God just got a hold of me again. Almost like the altar of the lawnmower. It was in my workshop, my little barn behind the house, that I just broke down. And not being a very emotional person, that was unusual for me. I went to my wife and I just shared with her that I have failed. I went to God and said, God, I've not been the servant. I've not been the student of your word. I've not been a follower, even as a pastor, like I should. And that was probably one of the greatest crises of belief in my life. It was a time where God really showed me who he was. And through his word, he revealed to me who I was. And the Lord began to do some greater work in my life personally. Began to change the way I saw him. Instead of being more religious minded, I was more focused on Christ. And I want to encourage anybody, as you begin, as you are already in this journey called your Christian walk, don't just go through the motions. Don't just go to church to be going to church to check it off your list. Focus on your relationship with Christ. Focus on his intense love for you. Focus on all he has done and all he is doing in your life. And maybe you're at a point in your life right now where you feel like you're just fatigued. You're tired. You can't go on anymore. I want to encourage you to run to that altar wherever it is. It's at a camp. Maybe it's a lawnmower in the middle of a field. Maybe it's a workshop behind your house. Your altar can be anywhere. See, God doesn't have to have a specific place. He just needs to have a heart that's willing. But find your altar today. Seek an audience with God. Confess anything in your life that hinders your relationship with him. Submit to following him. Because I want to tell you today, I still face challenges. I still face obstacles and mountains and valleys both. But there's a difference when you're walking with God than when you just appear to be walking with God. Isaiah 59 tells us, behold, the hand of the Lord is not short that he cannot reach out, and his ears are not stopped up that he cannot hear you. But my sin has put a barrier between me and my God, so that he will not hear our prayers. Don't let something so insignificant as the selfishness of our sin hinder a relationship that you and I can have with God. Find your altar today and thank God that he loves us enough that even in our failures and in all of our flaws, he cares enough to redeem us and bring us back into the family. Thank you for taking the time to listen.